Right, let's move on then to the inspectorate of prisons. A dry topic in some ways, but a very important one. Prisons and other places of detention are largely hidden from view. Their walls and fences are all that most of us will ever see. There's always a better use for a piece of land than as a place for a prison. So the argument for closing down prisons is a strong one. But at the same time, prisons are an ever-present reality in our societies today, and independent scrutiny of the condition that prisoners are held in is a very important democratic function. And that's the role of the Prisons Inspectorate for England and Wales. They just cover the England and Wales prisons. There are separate inspectorates that look at the situation in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Last month, they published 5 reports on prisons, 2 of them relating to children's prisons, and they're the ones that we particularly would like to focus on today. So first of all, Rainsbrook Secure Training Centre, inspectors there found that physical assaults on children were common. Children told inspectors that some of them were carrying weapons just in case. Of course, we are not safe, commented one child. Somebody is going to die here soon, said another. Now, Rainsbrook has already been the subject of an urgent notification back in June when the inspectors originally inspected the site. And following that, all the children from Rainsbrook were moved out of that prison into other institutions. A further urgent notification, this time on Oak Hill Secure Training Centre, was issued just this month, or the month that we're covering, October. Inspectors there found that children were living, quote, in a dilapidated environment, experience frequent incidents of violence and use of force, and are often cared for by inexperienced staff. The campaign group Article 39 has called for an inquiry into Oak Hill, as well as demanding that government takes immediate steps to keep children safe and to prevent further human rights violations. So why is it in the 21st century we are in a situation where vulnerable children are being confined in such dangerous, damaging and traumatic conditions? Joe, what do you have to say about this one?
Politeness actually stops me saying what I actually think about this, to be perfectly frank with you.
Be as impolite as you like within broadcasting regulations.
Okay, it is appalling. It is appalling that we are here. I mean, bearing in mind, we can have a whole discussion about whether we should be placing children, right? I'm just going to stress that, whether we should be placing children into what are in effect kiddie prisons. We can have a whole discussion about that. And that's one that has to do with principle and as well as politics. There's a lot of evidence to say that we shouldn't be doing that. But let's just bracket that discussion off for a second. The fact that we actually do that in conditions where children are left unsafe is a marker of how cavalier our governments are with regards to taking seriously their obligations to ensuring the children who they are responsible for have a minimum standard of welfare, right? Because we have to remember, and I know I keep saying this, these are legal children. They can do many things, and we can have a whole nother discussion about agentic children who are also in conflict with the law and how we deal with that. We could have a discussion about that. But overall, the one thing that and Hannah's fine legal mind will be able to dissect some of my sociological glossings over details. But I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that when somebody is a legal child, there are many things they can do, but they have limited control over their environment. Now, if you then put them into a place that is designed solely and only for removing somebody's liberty, which is what incarceration is. We can add other things to it, but ultimately, to be incarcerated is to remove one's liberty. We've now put children who have so little control over their lives into a situation that they have even less control over. And then we do that in conditions that are as appalling as have been described in those 2 inspector reports. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to F and blind because that's rude and that's broadcasting. But I have nothing but contempt that we are back here in this place in the 21st century. This needs to be raised further up the political agenda. because we shouldn't have this situation happening. We should not be reading reports like that.
I mean, one of the things that really struck me about the Oak Hill urgent notification was the reference to the Secure Training Centre, Oak Hill, as a dilapidated environment. Now, there are a number of prisons, as everybody, all the panel will know, and indeed I'm sure many people in our audience will know, there are many prisons that date back to Victorian period. There are prisons that go back further than that. I mean, Brixton Prison, for example, was opened in 1818. It's 200 years old. Dartmoor even older than that. So there are some very old prisons, and you'd expect maybe some of them to be described as dilapidated. But Oak Hill is I don't exactly know when it was built, but it's a pretty new building. So what is that saying, just on a really mundane level, in terms of maintenance of prison buildings? It's something as modern as Oak Hill is being described as dilapidated.
Can I just jump in there though, Richard? So absolutely, 100%, what does it say? But also dilapidation doesn't happen overnight. Do you know what I mean? You don't take a modern place and then, wake up one morning and go, oh my, look, overnight it became dilapidated. This is long-term disinvestment, long-term lack of interest. And can I also just pick something else out about the Rainsbrook report? When I read that, I mean, it was difficult reading, right? For me, difficult reading. But what really struck me is, what on earth are we doing that we are putting children into places where they are speaking of such fear? Because we can talk about lack of safety, but to me, when I read many of the things that the children said, I thought, oh my God, these children are living in fear. And given that we, as a state, a government, are responsible for that and responsible for the disinvestment of the dilapidation, in Oak Hill, it's just damning.
So where do we go from here? I mean, I guess if we want to look positively about this, and that's the wrong word, I realize, but the youth custodial population has dropped significantly from the situation 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had over 3,000 children in various prisons. Now, I think when I last looked at it, it was about 600 or 700. So, and I'm pretty sure that, if I'd been asked 10 years ago, what would you feel about, in 10 years' time, only 600 or 700 children in custody? I'd say, yeah, thank you, I'll take that. But at the same time, the conditions, Joe, as you indicate, remain absolutely appalling. And there are children, and as you say, these are children living in very fearful conditions, which, even if one's adopting the guise of a conventional penal reformer, is hardly likely to be conducive to reform and rehabilitation. So I'm just I feel daunted, actually.
Yeah. Can I just jump in and I don't want to hog the ground here because I don't know if Helen or Hannah want to say anything, right? 2008 was when we had the most number of children in prison, right? So it's been now 13 years that the population's been dropping. And one can predict that for all sorts of reasons. There are ways that we could come to terms with how and why that's happened. But if we're now down, and I've long since maintained that if we ever got down to around the 500 mark, that's the point at which we should be kicking off a campaign for abolishing children's prisons. Right? Because you cannot tell, and that's about the world of politics rather than analysis, but you cannot tell me that we have 600 such dangerous children in this world that they must be placed in places like that. I won't believe that. Do you know what I mean? And so at this point, I would encourage anyone who's interested in issues around youth justice to actually start thinking about the campaign group Article 39 and thinking about how we can think differently about doing justice for young people. Because that good news about the whole youth justice sector shrinking like it has means maybe we can actually just get rid of it.
Thank you very much, Joe. And you mentioned Article 39. They are an excellent organisation, and we can share their details in the follow-up email after this event, and also the Alliance for Youth Justice, another really good organisation. So it's unfair to single out just two. There's a number of, there's Just for Kid Law. I mean, you could keep going. So there's a number of excellent organisations working in this area, but it's a very difficult and challenging one. Before we move on to the next item, there's a question here from Hazel Roberts. Can it ever be the case that a private company such as G4S, because they are the operators of Oak Hill, private companies such as G4S can prioritise the welfare of children over profit? And it's that kind of, you know, old debate really about public versus private, and where the private prisons are themselves part of the problem here. Joe, a couple of quick thoughts from you on that, maybe, or anyone else, and then we should move on to the next item.
I can answer that really quickly. It's never going to happen. Do you know? I mean, and maybe I'm not kind of sitting thinking with my finest, most subtle brain at the moment, but that tension is too great to overcome, and the issue around children's welfare is fundamentally, qualitatively and quantitatively different than the welfare of adults. So I think that those tensions are too profound.